I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Panama to introduce an address by the head of state.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. It is my great honor to present the pre-recorded statement by the President of the Republic of Panama, His Excellency Laurentino Cortizo Cohen, for the first virtual debate in the lifetime of this organization, to open the 75th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Su Excelencia,
Excellency Volkan Bozkir, President of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Heads of State and Government. Distinguished delegates. History has taught us that decisions taken during a crisis define and mark the world for decades. That is to say, the great tests upon humanity, such as pandemics, have forced us to break with the past and to imagine a new world. This pandemic is no different. It is a doorway, a bridge between one world and the next. As world leaders today, we are facing a vast array of extraordinary, monumental challenges. In the short, medium, and long term, COVID-19 has put society's paradigms to the test, and it challenges us to actively build the future that we want. This will require changes in our economic systems, in our leadership and governance. It will require transparency, protecting and restoring biodiversity, human rights, and social inclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has shone a spotlight on some of the contradictions in public policies across the world and has revealed to us that a post-pandemic world must be sustainable and must be better. The decisions we take today will have long-term consequences. Doing more of the same is simply unsustainable. This would fail to recognize the scale of human suffering that the pandemic has unleashed. This crisis is alarming, in part because it has new and unknown characteristics. It is a global health emergency. However, the most worrisome part of the pandemic is not new. COVID-19 has shown up the deep existing inequalities. Whilst the pandemic does affect all of us, it does not affect all of us equally. We must focus everybody's attention on poverty and inequality. Although some may have chosen to ignore them in the past, we cannot now fail to recognize the bold facts of poverty and inequality. One thing must be understood. The post-pandemic world will still have the same problems that we are now facing, but under more extreme conditions. We will only have a different post-pandemic world if immediately, still in the middle of this battle, whilst we are taking mitigation measures, we also ensure that we are laying the foundations to resolve these problems, to generate deep structural transformations. If we correctly learn the lessons from this crisis, we will be able to achieve a social consensus, allowing us to expedite the necessary reforms to achieve a prosperous society, but above all, a just society with greater solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the main lessons learned during this pandemic, for example, is the importance of banking on science, technology and innovation to provide solutions which will allow us to close existing social divides. The circumstances created by the pandemic have made it possible to rapidly implement innovative systems. Learning processes have been accelerated as never before, generating greater social benefits from the state's investment in innovation. This is particularly true in the digital economy, and it is reflected in a migration towards models such as telecommuting or the consumption of goods and services through online apps with delivery services. This is also seen in the use of digital educational platforms of the first world, which we are now using in some of our public schools, or also in the example of telemedicine, which allows citizens in remote areas to benefit from care from specialist doctors hundreds of kilometers away. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the serious consequences of this health crisis has been an increase in unemployment. But this also generates an important opportunity for us, our economies, which are mainly informal in nature, to lay the foundations and make the necessary changes in public policies to build the future that we want, which will have entrepreneurship and formalization of employment at its heart. In a post-COVID-19 world, shared prosperity could be the result of a shared vision of global solidarity. The most important lesson that the pandemic is leaving us is that we must work together on problems which affect the whole of humanity. We are, without a doubt, stronger united than divided. We must remember that since the Second World War, it was the need to survive, rebuild economies, and avoid the scourge of a new war which united countries to generate a new international order. The pandemic has reproduced this de facto solidarity. We have seen how, through tangible actions by countries, international cooperation has been mobilized. For example, scientists in Asia, Europe, and America are sharing data and experience. Ladies and gentlemen, Panama is the country with the greatest maritime and air connectivity in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it has done this in its position as a hub for the Americas, putting its infrastructure at the service of the world and keeping its 144 maritime routes and 1,700 ports on its canal operational. We have kept our port and airport systems open, thus guaranteeing the logistics chains to provide global supplies, particularly of food and medicine. We are demonstrating our solidarity by providing humanitarian assistance and allowing transit through the canal of the Zaandam and Rotterdam cruise ships, which are affected by COVID-19, so that their passengers could be treated in time, avoiding a greater tragedy. We have opened up our infrastructure to the service of the region, so that through our regional logistics centre, the United Nations Food Programme and the International Red Cross, it has been possible to distribute humanitarian assistance in the form of food, medicine and medical equipment to over 30 countries. Only if we are united can all countries advance with solidarity and cooperation. If the international community fails to respond now in a decisive way, then the United Nations Agenda 2030 runs a real risk of being fatally derailed. A new multilateral order requires a real commitment from each one of our countries to carry out tangible actions based on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And we must ensure that what is agreed upon here in this forum is implemented at home. Ladies and gentlemen, our planet has been dealt a heavy blow. The pandemic has inflicted pain on millions of human beings. We have been waging a daily battle with no respite, locked down against the invisible and the uncertain, but standing strong and never surrendering. We have lost grandparents, parents, sons and daughters in this deadly combat against the virus. Nurses, doctors and health workers have fallen. We trust that a vaccine is not far away and that we will be able to halt this ill which nobody wished for. We will recover. Governments and world leaders have the obligation to recognize their mistakes, to be prepared, so that our health systems can address crises such as the one we are now living through. We can and must help one another. But we must learn from this horror that rather than rebuilding, we need to construct a new society with more solidarity, which is more equitable and just. Together, united as nations, we will build the future we want. Make no mistake, multilateral action is the right path to follow. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Panama for the statement just made.